Blazing Inferno is the sophomore full-length album from Yoth Iria. This is an Athens, Greece-based kind of supergroup to start out. It was kind of the return of Jim Mutilator, who is very important to the formative structure of bands like Rotting Christ, Verathron as founding members of those groups, as well as being involved in many other things over the years, including zines, music store for many years, and whatnot. Music is obviously a big part of his life and his identity, and of course, the most important thing is that he's one of the people who brought taste in heavy metal to black metal in the interpretation that is specific to Greece and their Athens-based scene in general. And so I think it's important to note that give him that credit, that you can feel his signature in those early Rotting Christ works. You can feel his signature in the early Verathron works. And I think for a lot of people entering into the general cult that created, those are the most essential releases. They're most accessible ones, and they're the most characterizing ones. Now, of course, the Magus was a huge part of that too. He was part of the first album, and up until they started recording this record, I think until about 2020 or so, he was the vocalist, and he added something a little bit avant-garde to what Yoth Iria were doing when they started out. So we really had two of the most fundamental names and people behind the Greek black metal sound in one group, and they'd come up with something that didn't feel regressive. It was interesting because if you went into Yoth Iria's first record and their early releases expecting a total throwback to 1992, 1993, you didn't get that. You actually got something that was new and evolved and dramatic in its own way, that wasn't trying to sound like the old ways. They weren't fumbling on purpose. They weren't dumbing it down, and they were presenting heavy metal. Like essentially, that was a heavy metal sound that carries through with this general release here. Now, I don't think George Emanuel is still involved with this band, but he was most releases up to this point. And now there's a new sort of quartet that Jim Mutilator has been working with for this record. So this is a big change, I would say. If you listen to The Flame of the Whirling Swords and didn't know what that was back in 2023, kind of join the club. It was an experimental EP that seemed like they were demoing ideas for the next one and seeing what they could manage. And now Blazing Inferno cranks up the volume, the intensity, and the professionalism, in the sense that this is a true follow-up, and probably a most serious release from a band that is out to tour, that is out to play bigger shows, and is ready and all that. So consider Blazing Inferno a very serious second coming of Yoth Iria, and maybe a more practical band that can go out and perform, and that really changes the context and the sound of the band in a profound way. I would say a profoundly good way, and I think if you're a fan of this type of music, you'll agree as we listen to this first clip. So throughout this review, I couldn't really avoid the frame of reference of Rotting Christ. I think that's because the main songwriter here was involved in Rotting Christ until at least 1996, and then in some respect until about 2000. And so those are very important formative releases for me in terms of getting into not only black metal, but Hellenic black metal and melodic metal in general. And so when I hear pieces of Triarchy of the Lost Lovers or any other Rotting Christ record and reference them here, it's not because they're so similar. It's because you could hear the voice of this artist and the way that he'd influenced the trajectory of that other band in his own way. And in that sense, if you're looking for something that sounds like Greek black metal, that is just, it's right there with its melodicism and its simple presentation in a heavy metal songwriting type and general construction, that's what you're getting out of this record. It's a very direct and very easy to grasp presentation. So you won't find anything all that wildly experimental in this record. You'll find a lot of very catchy and direct to the point songs, much in the way the most recent Devicer record was just kind of anthem after anthem. This record starts to feel like that, like they're really just hitting that sweet spot, and you'll see that in a live setting they kind of produce variations on a theme in a lot of ways. Blazing Inferno it dials back on the unique stature of the first record and kind of gives the fans kind of what they would want and expect in terms of the knack of the songwriter, the catchiness of the songs, the melodic leads, and the types of riffs that aren't quite stumbling in the old way, that aren't kind of tripping over a drum machine. It could possibly alienate people who don't want a very polished sound, a very modern sound. But this isn't modern in the sense of cheap and overproduced bullshit. This is it is still actual black metal, and I think that if you're a fan of that and you've been a fan of it for a long time, this will fit like a glove, as it did for me. This is just a very easy record to get into, very easy to pick up and listen to. There was no missteps, there's no out of place songs. It flows pretty well. There is a bit of repetition involved that really just helped it stick in my head overall. And so of course, there's a bias here. I'm just a huge fan of all of this. It's some of my favorite music, just in general. So gauge that based on your own fandom otherwise. For me, this is easily one of the best records of November. Just something I've been looking forward to for a handful of years, and I'm glad it turned out as well as it did. That's a very high recommendation for me, and expect to see me talking about that at the end of the month as one of the better releases. Otherwise, this released on November 8th. You can check it out now, and go ahead and read my review, which goes in depth with what I thought of the full record and what really stood out about it.